All right. Um, Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to this public information session for our updated draft of the city's long-range solid waste management plan. Today, it's 2 o'clock on Tuesday, October 13th. I am Sarah Mason, the Division Manager for Recycling with the City of Houston Solid Waste Management Department. I will be the moderator and facilitator of this meeting to present the draft of our long-range solid waste management plan and hear comments and questions from you all. This is a virtual meeting using Microsoft Teams and will be recorded and shared afterward on our project website for the long-range plan in the documents section. I'd like to thank you all for participating in our discussion today and remind you that as this is a virtual meeting, we ask that you please keep your phone or computer muted during the meeting unless and until your name is called to provide comments. Next. The meeting agenda is on the slide before you. We will have an overview presentation of the long-range solid waste management plan, which will be around 30 minutes, and include the background work completed, goals established, and recommended future actions. After the presentation concludes, we will take up to 15 minutes to address any written questions that have been submitted in the chat log during the presentation. If you would like to submit a question, you can do so in the chat box. Please type the word question before your entry. We will be monitoring the chat log during the meeting and will address those questions at the end of the presentation, as I mentioned, for up to 15 minutes before moving on to the speaker list. At that time, we will be calling for speakers to share their comments and questions to the group. Speakers will be called on in the order that the request to speak was received. If you would like to share your comments aloud, request to speak in the chat box of the meeting. A reminder, please put your first and last name, as some attendees appear as guests and we will not know who to call on. If you're on the phone and not in front of a computer, we will call for speakers as well at the end of the presentation. At that time, please briefly unmute yourself and announce your name and that you would like to be added to the list of speakers. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to share their comments and/or questions, and the project team will respond to your comments at that time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to a productive discussion. We will now begin our overview presentation. Next. To begin with, why does Houston need a solid waste management plan? Why is it important? The city is responsible for the management of the waste generated within Houston, either through direct collections as we provide to residential units, or through policy and partnerships with private haulers and community stakeholders for material coming from the commercial sector. As Houston has grown and the available solid waste infrastructure has been used and consumed, we need to focus on how those needs will be met in the future. The goals of the Solid Waste Management Plan are to provide long-term solutions for the city's solid waste management needs. We adhere to the hierarchy for integrated waste management as seen here on the right-hand side of the slide, which lists the order of most preferred to least preferred from waste reduction to disposal. This plan is a 20-year plan looking out until 2040. It discusses how to improve service and right-size the solid waste management department and how to assure financial sustainability over the long term. It is also the basis for a zero waste management plan, how to best implement the solid waste priorities, as I mentioned, in order of waste reduction, recycling, material recovery, and finally disposal. The plan also identifies what solid waste infrastructure will be needed to meet the city's long-term needs into the future. That includes recycling capacity, composting, transfer stations, and landfills. The plan will have an impact on all sectors of the Houston community, including residential, apartments, businesses, and institutions. Next. The project scope was written to lead to smart solutions that are action-oriented and where the results can be measured. The city asked the project team to take a very detailed look at the status of Houston's solid waste and materials management ecosystem, including existing facilities, their status, and what will be needed in the future. They looked at our current waste generation sources, both at how much and where the material is coming from. and use that data to project the amount of waste we can anticipate in the future. They looked at current diversion programs and policies and compared those to adopted best practices in other communities. Finally, they have evaluated our current services and ways of doing business and made recommendations on how to improve those services for the benefit of Houston's environment as well as the financial viability of the program. The draft plan contains a number of recommendations related to reducing waste, improving service, improving our local environment, meeting future solid waste management needs, and improving the fiscal situation of the department. However, it will not be a final plan until we hear from you and others in the city of Houston and have a chance to incorporate that feedback into the final plan. Next slide. I mentioned we took a very detailed approach when preparing this plan, and part of that was doing background research. All of the research and analysis I talked about resulted in the documents listed here on the slide to support the formation of the goals and objectives of the long-range plan. Those documents include the facilities analysis and report that looks at the physical solid waste infrastructure, the waste generation forecast and diversion report, which looks at how much trash and recycling we have now and predicts that into the future, the analysis of our current programs and industry best practices, the funding assessment, and finally the draft plan document can all be found on our project website. If you visit our main department website at houstonsolidwaste.org, we have a link at the very top that will take you to the project website. And under the Documents tab, you can find a PDF copy of all of these documents. Thank you. Once the background research was completed, we began convening the advisory task force appointed by Mayor Turner to assist solid waste management in completing this project. The task force includes representatives from the solid waste industry, including landfill operators, recyclers, composters, haulers, along with representatives from the Houston community, nonprofit sector, and academia. In total, there were 22 people appointed, and we've held 7 meetings over the last year and a half. At each meeting, the task force was presented information on the different analysis completed by the consulting team and asked to give feedback and guidance on the creation of a sustainable materials management strategy for Houston for the next 20 years. This group has given a lot of their time and their talent, their experience, and we are so appreciative of their help on this project. And we do have several of them on the call today, and I appreciate them being here and continuing to support the work as we move forward. Next slide. So where are we now in the project timeline? As I mentioned, our approach has been to identify Houston's needs and resources first, and then identify a range of options available to the city, and then develop a Houston-specific strategy for meeting our current and future solid waste needs. The project team conducted a series of one-on-one interviews with people in the industry, city staff and leadership, and compiled data on all the pieces of our materials management ecosystem. Then, with the help and guidance of the Mayor's Advisory Task Force, goals, objectives, and recommendations were drafted to provide Houston with the Sustainable Materials Management Program for the next 20 years. At this time, we are polishing the draft with feedback and comments from our residents. This phase of the project is to gain public input through these public information meetings and request written comments on our website. In addition to the informational meetings and website, we are also asking Houston residents to respond to our survey that is also posted on the website. The survey is designed to gain your feedback, not just on the plan, but on the performance of our department in providing service and your recommendations for improving those services. So I hope you will take a few minutes to check out that after today's meeting if you've not already completed it. The survey will be open until October 31st. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Carlton, who's our project manager on the consulting team, to walk you through the details of their findings and the recommendations on the plan.
Thank you, Sarah. I want to express my appreciation to you and Harry Hayes, your director, for letting us be part of this important project. And I also want to echo your comments regarding appreciation to all the members of the Mayor's Advisory Task Force for their participation and input. It was extremely important in giving us a very local expression of what the needs were and what the recommendations are for the future of this plan. So again, I want to thank them for their participation. Next. I want to step back. As Sarah mentioned, we did a very extensive analysis of the current situation and what challenges Houston is facing. Houston is unique in the way as it relates to solid waste management. The Solid Waste Management Department provides service to nearly 400,000 households. These services include garbage, recycling, yard waste, tree waste, and junk waste collection. The Solid Waste Management Department also provides services for the collection of materials at drop-off centers and environmental centers where residents can take household hazardous waste. One of the interesting things I learned in doing this plan is the vast area that Houston covers. It's nearly 640 square miles. Several large cities in the U.S. could actually fit within its boundaries. Those two facts alone have a significant bearing on the city's equipment and personnel needs. Unlike most cities throughout the country, Houston pays for its program through the general fund. Most other cities in the country pay through an enterprise fund, which is paid for through a monthly service fee. This allows those cities to operate more like a business in terms of their operation. During my presentation, we'll discuss issues such as collection needs, facilities such as transfer stations and landfills, and other solid waste management needs. The city's program does rely on a mix of both public and private sector facilities, and in many ways is a regional system, not just within the City of Houston's boundaries. More than 2/3 of the waste comes from businesses and institutions. Unlike the last plan, which was done back in 1990, the comprehensive plan, that plan focused primarily on the residential sector. This plan looks at the entire city, including multifamily households and the commercial sector and institutions. It's going to be critical for all of those sectors be part of the solution to Houston's solid waste management needs. And we've got policies and program recommendations that deal with all of those sectors. Next. Houston's challenges. What are the challenges that the City of Houston's facing for its solid waste management program? Well, there are several. Funding is the biggest challenge that the city faces. In comparison to other cities, the amount that Houston spends per household is significantly less. Again, because the funding source is from the general fund, solid waste must compete with other city priorities funded from this source. And again, we're looking at the creation of a possible enterprise fund to deal with this specific issue. The city's increase in multifamily households also creates unique problems for the city's collection program. New approaches to dealing with these situations needs to be explored and implemented. As I mentioned, the commercial sector accounts for a majority of the waste, approximately 3.5 million tons generated from the commercial sector, which includes multifamily sector, compared to 700,000 tons generated by the residential sector. If the city is going to achieve large-scale waste reductions, this sector needs to be part of the solution. I'm talking about the commercial sector. Storm events such as Hurricane Harvey and other events have increased over the past years, and each year the city has to deal with major wind and flooding events. These events create large quantities of waste that need to be managed in a very short period of time. Finally, disposal capacity in the region is approximately 30 to 35 years. As landfills reach capacity, the city will have to haul waste longer distances, and to assure that capacity is available over the long term, the city needs to be planning now because it takes approximately 10 to 15 years to secure new capacity. The final point is Houston currently relies 100% on private facilities for the disposal of waste. Next. As Sarah mentioned, we did an extensive analysis of both the waste generation and the facilities to manage that waste. Houston residents, businesses, and institutions generate approximately 4.3 million tons of waste per year. If there's not major changes in the way that products are produced or in the way that we manage the waste stream will increase to 5.4 million tons by the year 2040. Residents are responsible for 20% of the total waste stream. The remaining 80% comes from businesses and institutions. It's going to be up to all those sectors to deal with this problem to improve the environment and assure long-term disposal capacity. There are encouraging signs, though. We did look at the recycling sector and how much material is being recovered in the city of Houston. We estimated that approximately 2 million tons are currently being recycled. Much of this is construction and demolition waste, but there are efforts by several businesses in Houston to make significant reductions in waste generation. Several large-scale businesses now have sustainability goals that include reducing the amount of waste that they generate, but also looking at the products they produce to make them less wasteful and more easily recyclable. We're optimistic about that these changes will impact waste trends, but to be safe, we generally plan for the worst case scenario so that necessary facilities are available when the city needs them. Next. The next thing that we did was looked at the solid waste infrastructure. When people often think about waste management facilities, they immediately think of a landfill. In fact, the region relies on a wide variety of facilities to manage waste. These include material recovery facilities, which process the recyclable materials you place in your recycling cart. Scrap material dealers, which buy recycled paper, plastic, metals, and other recyclables, are an important part of managing waste and improving recycling. Drop-off centers and recycling centers where residents can bring trash and recyclables, which are operated by the city. These facilities are often the best opportunity for residents in multifamily households to be able to participate in recycling. Mulch and composting facilities process yard waste, brush, tree waste, and in some cases, sludge and food waste. Transfer stations where waste from collection vehicles is taken to the transfer station and transferred into larger vehicles. This is a more economical way to transfer waste, especially in places like Houston, which have significant traffic congestion problems. And finally, landfills. These are engineered facilities with liners, covers, and regulated operating and closure standards. As part of the planning process, we did a thorough evaluation of these facilities, and as Sarah mentioned, the report that we did is available on their website. Next. Increases in waste reduction efforts and recycling will mitigate the need for landfills, but in the short to midterm, the city is going to have to continue to rely on landfills for proper waste disposal. There's no silver bullet currently available that will eliminate waste entirely for Houston. The city relies on every one of the landfills in the Houston-Galveston region. The landfills have an estimated capacity, again, of about 30 to 35 years, assuming waste generation continues on its current path. And this takes into account anticipated growth in population and economic activity over that planning timeframe. For new capacity, either the city or private firms has to identify an acceptable site, secure a permit from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, which may include a public hearing, then construct the facility. And we're looking at a facility that is in the neighborhood of approximately 600 to 1,000 acres. It takes approximately 10 to 15 years to go through the process I just described. Next. We presented the Mayor's Advisory Task Force with a lot of information and options for dealing with the issues facing the city. Before we did that, though, we asked them to assist us in developing goals and objectives for the plan. Identified 5 major categories of goals and objectives. The project team evaluated the data, evaluated the options that are available, and looked at what other cities are doing to manage waste. From that, we presented a range of options to the task force, and they were involved in prioritizing specific recommendations. The following slides go through those 5 categories and identify some of the key issues and specific recommendations of the plan. When the task force, one of the best things about having the task force there was that we recognize that what the Solid Waste Management Department does is a very personal service to all of its residents. And we know that the Houston's goal was to both improve the level of service that was being provided and to protect the environment on a long-term basis. Next. The Mayor's Advisory Task Force identified 5 basic goals for the long term. These include the program should be sustainable, and materials management means reducing waste through public education and incentives for better product stewardship through recycling and composting, quality and timely service to Houston residents, and to engage the commercial sector more in the future years, to build the infrastructure necessary to meet the city's long-term needs. The program should be financially sustainable. Programs should have the fiscal resources to pay for the quality of services that residents expect from the department. The program should also recognize the needs of low-income individuals. This was one of the points that the task force wanted to make sure that we addressed. And Beautiful City, which focuses on reducing illegal dumping, cleaning up existing sites, as well as cleanup of homeless encampments and increased litter control. Next. Next. Next slide, please.
Hey,
sorry.
Hey, Mike, this is Sarah. Yes. I think maybe you had a delay on your side seeing the slides. Yeah, because you want to be on the goal number 1, sustainable materials management.
Yeah, so you back up. Apparently I wasn't seeing them on my screen.
Okay, yeah, next one from this one, Abel.
Right, number 1. Okay, well, I apologize for that.
Okay.
If we had an in-person meeting, this wouldn't be an issue, but that's as I mentioned, the first goal that we want to look at was sustainable materials management, and the plan is designed to work towards a zero waste community. Next. And right now I'd like to have Allison Truelock talk a little bit about some of the current issues that cities are facing right now as it relates to sustainable programs and their implementation. Allison, are you available?
Yes, sure. And I think 2 of the main issues that are facing recycling programs for every city are markets and contamination. So by markets, we mean when you put your recyclables in the container, the city collects it, takes it to the processor sorts the material and bales it, and then sells the bales to the recycling markets where they can be turned into new products. Recycling markets and those prices have always been very volatile, but in the last couple of years, the recycling market prices have remained relatively depressed or relatively low. And so that impacts revenue generation for recycling programs. And then on the other end, it's a contamination issue that every city is facing as well. So contamination is anything that gets put in the recycling container that isn't part of the recycling program. And once that gets to the processor, it has to be sorted out and then hauled to the landfill or otherwise disposed. And so that adds cost and you lose some efficiency in the program as well. So most recycling programs today are facing these reduced revenues because of the markets, and then increased costs and lost efficiency because of contamination.
Thanks, Allison. Next. One of the things that we did, and we had participation from the task force in putting together a survey of residents as it relates to both the plan and solid waste management services. And one of the questions that we looked at was participation in current recycling programs. And what we're finding is, I think, Sarah, you mentioned we have something like 350 responses at this point. Houstonians are in general participating in the recycling program. Over 60% say that their green bins are 80% full at the time of collection, as you can see in that chart. Regardless of the responses regarding knowing what should go in the bins, most people feel that they do know and have a good sense of what's supposed to be there. The city's contamination rate is still very high. Most people that live in apartments indicated that they did not have access to recycling, about 68%, and 60% responded that they do not have recycling at their workplaces. Next. Want to walk through some of the major recommendations of the sustainable management program recommendations that are presented in the plan. It is a comprehensive plan. As I mentioned, it looks at not just the residential sector, but the multifamily sector and commercial sector as well. The recommendations are to adopt the climate action plan recommendations for residential reductions of 50% reduction by 2040, enhance public information, public education programs, enact measures to significantly reduce contamination in residential recycling programs, enhance multifamily recycling efforts, initially through public information programs and then mandatory programs. Next. Enhance private sector source reduction and recycling efforts. Again, working with the private sector and businesses and institutions through public information programs, information sharing, and then focusing on mandatory programs. Encourage greater food waste management through reduction, food donations, and composting. Divert sludge to composting facilities. And improve data gathering so that the city can more effectively evaluate programs to determine what's working and what programs need changes. Next. The task force spent a lot of time talking about the need for the city to improve the services that they provide and how to accomplish that. The actions in this section are focused on giving Houston residents the services that they expect. Next. Solid waste management services that the city provide includes garbage and recycling collection as a base service, monthly bulk waste collection, weekly yard waste collection, a comprehensive environmental program including household hazardous waste drop-off sites for trash and recyclables, the reuse warehouse and neighborhood depository sites, great waste disposal and recycling contracts for services through FCC, highly successful disaster management response, and they've got a great executive team. It's incredible what Harry Hayes and his team are able to do given the resources that are available to them. Provide full range of services on a shoestring budget. The department is involved in a number of efforts to enhance the local environment through recycling and other programs such as eliminating illegal dump sites. Next. We looked at one of the things that we did in the survey was provide residents an opportunity to provide their general comments, and it is a somewhat of a mixed bag in terms of experience with the service that they're being provided. Respondents have very different opinions on the level of service that the city is giving them. One of the things that we also asked them about was how full their carts are, and you can see on the chart there that most residents have their weekly carts either 80 to 100% full. What the goal of the plan is to try and flip this chart around so that a majority of that solid waste cart is more on the 20% and less side of that graph. Next. As I mentioned, this is very personal service that the city provides, and they want to do it right. The recommendations that we have in terms of the quality of service goal include right-sizing the operations by expanding fleet and staffing to meet citizen commitments, to establish route allocations that get the waste collected in an 8 to 10 hour period, modernize the solid waste fleet, emphasize right-sizing the truck is not just a number of trucks, but that the old trucks need to be eliminated, and so that they operate a more efficient fleet. Half of the city's trucks are over 7 years old, and that increases maintenance costs significantly. Expand the number of drop-off facilities and household hazardous waste collection services. Provide efficient, safe, and responsive service in times of heavy storms and other disaster events. Next. Looking at the infrastructure for materials management. The goal here is to ensure long-term disposal capacity and sustainable solid waste infrastructure. In 2019, the city took a big step in meeting this goal with the construction of the FCC Material Recovery Facility. The facility is owned by the city to process recyclable materials from Houston's households and businesses. In the coming years, the city will need to improve its existing transfer stations, add more drop-off centers, and evaluate ways to make sure that there is a place to dispose of waste. Next. Houston region has 12 municipal solid waste landfills and 15 construction and demolition waste landfills. Capacity is decreasing annually. We have also talked about an aggressive waste reduction and recycling program. However, even with big changes in waste management practices, the city will continue to need landfill disposal for the foreseeable future. Houston's transfer stations are over 20 years old and in need of repair. In addition, the city will need to incorporate transfer capabilities for recyclable materials collected across the city and transport those materials to the FCC facility. I do want to point out that the FCC was recently recognized nationally for one of the top material recovery facilities in the country. One of the things that was done a couple of years ago was an analysis of the transfer stations and the needs that they have in terms of capital improvements. I believe there was something on the order of $12 million worth of improvements that are necessary. Those have been put on hold largely due to budgetary reasons. And the recommendation in the plan is to move forward with those improvements and make those facilities much more efficient in operations. Next. We asked residents about whether the city should be proactively planning for disposal capacity to meet the city's needs. And this is one area where we saw strong agreement. Approximately 76% of the residents agreed or strongly agreed that the city should have an active role in planning for this capacity. Next. The recommendations that we prepared in the plan for the infrastructure section include construct a new transfer station in the northeast part of the city, invest in existing transfer stations with the capital requirements that I just mentioned, site and permit a new city-owned landfill. This facility could be operated either by the city or by a private firm. The city's current 3 transfer stations that it owns, the city owns them, but actually contracts out operations of those facilities, and the landfill could be similar to that. Evaluate closed facilities for brownfield development. This is a multi-year process, and the challenges will be significant. It's necessary to start this process sooner than later to avoid a crisis. And then finally, evaluate rail haul as a long-term option for the city. Siting facilities is becoming more and more difficult, especially near urban centers, and long haul distances may be required to find a site that's acceptable for the city, and rail haul may be an option for making that work out. Finally, track and evaluate resource recovery technologies for meeting the city's future waste management needs when they're economically and environmentally feasible. Next. Fourth area that we looked at was assuring financial sustainability. Houston needs a more sustainable funding to be competitive with other cities and provide quality services to residents while expanding efforts towards sustainable material management. The program, City of Houston's program is extremely underfunded and relies on the general fund for its budget. Again, most cities are able to fund their programs through a monthly service fee and environmental fees. This reduces the possibility that in rough budgetary times, the program is still able to adequately buy equipment necessary and maintain staffing levels that result in quality, efficient, economical services. Again, the task force, as we talk about financial sustainability, wanted to make sure that this was an equitable program and that we looked for opportunities to assist low-income individuals. Next. One of the things that we did when we did the plan was to do a comparison of Houston to other major cities in the state of Texas. And what this chart shows demonstrates that the city's program needs additional resources to provide the necessary service. One can look at this and say that Houston's operating extremely efficiently in terms of providing service with essentially half the number of employees that other cities have per household, or half the budget that these cities have. But that's true to some extent, but it also means that the city's program does not get the resources it needs in order to provide quality service and provide the services that they expect. What the chart shows is Houston, again, providing approximately 390,000 households with service, which is the largest of those 4 other cities that we looked at. The household served per FTTE is basically the household served per employee, and what that shows is each employee for Houston services about 893 households, and the average is in the mid 400s. And as far as the budget per household, Houston is at $235 per household. Again, the average somewhere in the $400 per household for these other cities. Next. We also looked at what other cities are charging in terms of what these fees are. A monthly, and these fees range from $15 to $50 per household per month. And this is dependent on the level of service, the level of recycling and reduction efforts. While Austin has the highest rates in this chart, they also have the highest degree of material recovery and source reduction results. A monthly solid waste user fee typically applies to just the residents that receive service. The monthly environmental fee, however, applies to residents, also residents of multifamily households and the commercial sector, and goes to fund programs that benefit the entire city, not just the residents that receive service. Next. So what would a more sustainable funding provide? Again, it would right-size collection operations with necessary collection equipment and staffing, increase the number of additional depositories. City has 6, but it needs 5 more. Increase the number of inspectors needed to address illegal dumping enforcement. And with proper service resources, customer service levels would be greatly enhanced, and provide first-class programs designed to reduce waste generation and improve the quality of the recycling program. Next. We asked residents about their support for a fee, and the results are very preliminary at this point. But what we're seeing is that there's basically a split between those that support it, those that are relatively neutral on this issue, and those that oppose a fee. There was a more in favor of the fee when asked the question, would they support a fee that ensures the system is properly sized and allows for growth? Next. So the recommendations that the plan has in it for establishing a more financially sustainable program include establish funding mechanisms that provide long-term financial sustainability for solid waste management needs. These funding mechanisms include a monthly service fee, an environmental fee for all sectors, and also looking at grants as an option for securing funds. Secure alternative funding sources for paying for solid waste management, including grants and partnerships. Provide services utilizing best management practices. Evaluate opportunities to provide financial assistance for low-income homeowners, similar to the water program, which provides assistance for people with their water bills. And evaluate opportunities for public-private partnerships. Next. Clean and beautiful city. This is to address illegal dumping and litter. Some of the major issues that the city's facing are increasing number of illegal dump sites, insufficient number of drop-off sites to cover Houston's vast geographic area. Disposal costs are increasing, and a lack of funding for both enforcement and cleanup of sites. The map you see there is, the colors are the council districts, and the dots represent sites that cities identified over, I believe, a 12-month period. Next. Survey results. Again, we asked residents about the importance of an anti-litter program. And again, majority of residents felt that the city needed to have an active response to this. And whether or not residents have used the depositories and know about them as a way to properly dispose of certain waste. Next. The recommendations that we had related to clean and beautiful cities are to reduce litter throughout the city, presenting a more beautiful and healthier Houston, enhance efforts to reduce illegal dumping throughout the city, increase the number of drop-off centers and expand hours of operation, more aggressive enforcement of illegal dumping laws, improve communications among enforcement officials, and continue to clean up homeless encampments. Next. So those are the recommendations that that actually the Mayor's Advisory Task Force had come up with as far as the solid waste management plan. In the near term, Some of the major objectives of implementing this plan include securing financial sustainability, right-sizing service operations, again, establishing best practices for fleet replacement, enhancing customer engagement and education. This is especially focused on reducing the contamination in the recycling stream. Initiate future waste disposal outlets now, looking at identifying a future landfill. Strengthen the transfer station infrastructure. Getting actively involved on the multifamily and commercial waste management reductions. Again, these sectors need to be part of the solution. All of these things need council approval for them to actually take place. What we've developed is a plan with recommendations on where the city needs to go. It's going to be up to the city council to actually implement those recommendations. So what are the, next. What are the next steps? We've prepared a draft plan and it's out for public comment. We will be looking at the comments that we receive and incorporating them into the next draft of the plan, and then taking that back to the task force to indicate any changes that we've made. Once we've put that together, and we encourage people to write in comments on the plan. Again, you can do that on the city's website. And then once we have that input, we'll present to the city council. Then it's up to them to implement the projects and programs. Next. Again, we want to hear from you as it relates to your comments on the plan. The planning documents are available on the city's website. And this slide here provides you with where you can either submit comments and review those documents. And again, Sarah, I want to thank you for allowing us to be part of this important project. And again, the task force members appreciate you hanging in there. I know we put a lot of information out there, and your input was very important to us. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Mike. At this time, we've finished the overview presentation, and so a reminder that if you had questions, you can type those into the chat box and we will answer those now. If you would like to, we've had some people join us since we got started, so just reminding everyone, if you would like to speak and share your comments out loud, if you can type your first and last name and the phrase request to speak into the chat box. We'll call on people in the order of which we have received those requests. So and then if you haven't, again, as Mike mentioned, been to our website, you can go to houstonsolidwaste.org. That's the department's main homepage. And at the top of that, you'll see an announcement about the long range plan, which will take you to the project website. And on the project website, you can find a link to the survey. We would really like for you to take that. It takes about 10 minutes on average. So a little bit longer than just a 2 or 3 question, but we are getting some really good feedback from folks. So we'd love for you to do that. And it's open until October 31st. You can also find the documents, a copy of the draft plan as posted. You can download the full document, or we have it divided into sections if you're interested in looking only at, say, the executive summary or the recommended action plan, or you can look at the goals. You can also find the background documents we talked about. So we have our facility analysis and overview. We have the waste generation report. We have the review of our programs and services. So those documents are there as well in case there was something in the presentation. Please do ask your questions now, but if you wanted to look at it in even more detail, you can do that there. So let me go now and see what we've got come in terms of questions and requests to speak. we have a comment here around initiation of a transition to 100% renewable energy for waste and recycling truck fleets. And this, yes, so absolutely. The plan does talk about our solid waste fleet and does recognize, I think it is maybe the city of Los Angeles that's piloting some all electric garbage trucks. So that is a technology that is being tried out, and certainly the city, the recommendation in the plan, I think, is for Houston to continue to watch that for when it becomes practical and economically feasible, to start looking at implementing those more sustainable, truck fleet. So also, okay, we have another question. So as a reminder, we're going to do questions and answers for up to 15 minutes, and then we'll call on folks to speak at that time, just in case we had some questions come in during the presentation, which we do have a couple of here. Oh, let's see. And I'm sorry, yeah, Mike, I think maybe you forgot to turn on your camera if you wanted to do that, and everyone can kind of see who you are. And while I'm waiting for these questions to load, I will also briefly introduce the other members of our consulting project team. I'll be calling on them to help answer the questions, so you'll know who's speaking to you. We have Mike Carlton, who you just heard from. He's our project manager. He's with AZ&B Engineering in Dallas. He's got lots of years of extensive experience in the solid waste industry, helping cities write plans like ours, helping them with disposal infrastructure, and it is very involved in that area. We have Risa Weinberger with Risa Weinberger and Associates on the call. She has a lot of background and experience in composting and organics. So if you have questions around that, I'll probably be calling on her for that. And Allison Trulock with NewGen Strategies has experience. She's really our project team expert for the waste reduction, reuse, recycling, sort of zero waste components. And then also Tammy Wallace with InFocus Strategies has helped with our public outreach and engagement, and she's on the call as well. So if you hear from these different people helping to answer our questions as we go through them, you'll know who they are and what their role was in the project. So, okay, we have a question here. When will the plan go into implementation, 2021 or 2022? And so there, the plan, we're looking towards the end of the calendar year, maybe beginning of 2021 for formal adoption from City Council. But as to when the different pieces of the plan would be implemented, that will rely in part on the administration and City Council for those adoptions. Some of the recommended actions do have a timeline associated with them, and some are longer term than others, so that it will depend on kind of when they need to be adopted as well. Okay, next question is, what, if any, anticipated shifts within the waste streams, like from commercial to residential, is expected in the short and long term due to COVID-19 and changes in work patterns? So I will also address that briefly. We have seen increases in all of our programs since we started having our, work home, stay safe orders, and people transition more to working from home and doing school in home in March of this year. I know we also do have our department director, Director Hayes, on the line, and so he may want to jump in on this, but we have seen program increases, tonnage increases in all of our programs since we've had that transition. So people are maybe generating the same amount of waste, but it's now being collected, at their household rather than at school or at work where they normally would be. I see, Mike, did you want to add something?
Yeah, Sarah, what cities are seeing is, yes, on the residential side of things, waste quantities are increasing, but that's being more than offset by reductions on the commercial sector, with businesses such as restaurants being shut down, restaurants, bars being closed, and more people working at home. So what you're seeing is a 15% reduction on the commercial side, which accounts for 2/3 of the waste stream compared to, say, a 15% increase on the residential side. So what it's actually doing is a net effect is overall reduction in waste generation.
Great, that's helpful to know. Thank you. Yeah, and again, Mike, I don't know if you have your camera.
I do, and you can't see it?
No, we don't see you. I don't see you. But okay. So these are great questions, and we've got a lot of them coming in. So let's see, this question. Okay. This is a comment with a question, so I'll read it all, and then I'll probably call on Mike maybe to talk about this. Curbside waste collection often means that the sidewalk cannot be used by pedestrians for many hours before and after pickup. Have you considered asking for dedicated on-street trash can storage locations or permanent on-street shared dumpsters? This could be done in collaboration with Harris County's bike lane program and the our City of Houston Vision Zero program. So Mike, do you know, are there communities where they have oh, there you are, regulated where you place your cans and when you place them out to keep that sidewalk area free?
There are cities that have regulations on making sure that you keep the sidewalk clean or clear for your garbage can. A lot of it depends on what the conditions are on a given street, but yes, cities have established ordinances to provide access. In some cases, that's a little bit more difficult to implement than others, depending on the street condition. Mm-hmm. But it is something the city can look at. Again, the multifamily sector waste collection that the city is responsible for is probably one of the biggest collection challenges that you're facing in the future, other than the funding issue. So that is something that will have to be looked at over the next couple of years.
Great. Yes, I think that's one of those issues that's great to think about and add in as something for the city to consider and work interdepartmentally with other, like our planning department and others, as we look at our logistics for collection. The next question we have is, how will the monthly environmental fee be billed? Will it be billed like to individual households or billed via some other method? This is especially important for those communities that do not currently receive city trash services.
Yes, typically that's going to be solid waste departments will work with the water department, and most frequently that's tied to your water bill. And so if you receive water service, you'll also be getting that monthly environmental fee. That's how it would be billed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So, okay, and this one, I might call on Risa to help out with this question, because I know in addition to the organics, you did some of the research in looking at our illegal dumping and the enforcement of that. And this question is around those issues. Thank you, Philip. It looks like he has read the plan because he's citing a page reference. On page 131 of the report, there is a discussion about increasing code enforcement for dumping and increasing staff who can issue fines. Please elaborate. So Risa, I don't know if you want to speak to that one.
Okay. Well, the objective here really is to try to connect more closely, more directly, the act of illegal dumping and the consequences for doing it. So one of the things that we would like to do is to shorten the period of time that enforcement takes place, and we'd like to be able to give either solid waste staff or code enforcement or both the ability to quickly write citations for illegal dumping rather than waiting weeks or months for a violation to work itself through the court system. So that's one of the reasons that we're trying to do this, is just to try to make it a more immediate consequence for illegal dumping. I hope that answers your question.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Risa. And I know that I think there's also some discussion in there about bringing more of that work into a vertical integration within the solid waste department and working on that. But that is one of those things that is very tough to enforce against. We do work with HPD and Harris County as well on those illegal dumping enforcement issues. The next question is there a reason similar sized cities, I think this means nationally, weren't used? All the cities in our chart that was in the presentation are in Texas. And I will mention that we did, and I think the plan also includes information looking at the 10 largest cities in the country. So Houston is the 4th largest. So we did take a look at that, and but that's just in trying to keep things in summary for the presentation. I think we just included the Texas cities. Mike, did you want to add anything on that one?
No, but the findings are pretty much similar in terms of how other major cities are being funded and the level of funding that they're receiving. Again, most large cities are getting their funding through some type of monthly service fee, whether it's in Texas or across the country.
Great, thank you. I do know that there was like a point made, I think New York City does not have a user fee, but they do have a much broader and varied tax base of different revenues that they collect. Is that correct? Than what like the city of Houston has?
Correct.
Yeah, the city of Houston also does have our revenue cap, which is sort of a budgetary constraint that other cities do not face.
Sarah, this is Harry. If I might add, if you can hear me, of the top 10 cities in the country, Houston and New York City are alone. And as Mike pointed out, and you did as well, New York does not charge a solid waste fee. However, they have a personal income tax, which brings them over $30 billion a year. They also charge a commuter tax and various other user fees that make up the difference where one would have a solid waste fee. New York adopted a solid waste fee, I believe, about 15 or 20 years ago in order to better fund their police department. They went to the voters and they approved it along those lines. And then Chicago is the most recent city in the top 5 that recently adopted a solid waste fee, and they're doing the scaled-in approach. I believe right now they're, if Mike can verify this, they should be somewhere between $8 to $12 per home per month, with the eventual issue to be a full enterprise fund. And Chicago was suffering from the same issues that we were: inadequate equipment and staffing, customer service issues, the richness of the service just really shut out the general fund. Mike?
Correct. It's a problem facing, not just Houston and New York. I know that Dave Yonke just worked with the city of Phoenix, and they were going after a fairly significant change in their rate structure to cover the higher costs of waste management, including longer hauls, higher tipping fees, and the impacts that the recycling markets have had on recycling programs. So it's not just the way that the fees are being structured, but the fact that solid waste costs in the last couple of years have seen some pretty significant increases.
Yeah, okay. So we have a couple more minutes for questions before we move to call for speakers. We have another question. This person, I had the same concern as Neil about blocked sidewalks and bike lanes. Sidewalks in my neighborhood have been blocked for months with heavy trash and brush. So will there be any provisions to keep those areas clear, especially since the city is interested in increasing cycling and walking? And I think we have made a note of that to look into that issue and to include that as I guess that would probably fall under our quality service, looking at those issues and that goal. Another question we had was, will a solid waste management department spokesperson be available to make a presentation to local groups? And yes, we can definitely do that. So if you can, at our email that you see here, longrange@houstontx.gov, if you can send an email to that address and let us know, when you'd like to have that presentation, who you want us to talk to, we can get that scheduled for you. And this question is also around the fees, and was asking any thought about adjusting those comparable fees with the cost of living in the city. So are they cost of living, I guess, adjusted?
Typically, there are some cities that do modify it based on inflation factors. What most cities will do, though, is maintain a fee level for a certain number of years and then look at where their budget situation is and then modify that fee based on any cost increases for the service they're providing.
Okay. You may have heard that timer go off. I was monitoring our 15 minutes for Q&A. So we are going to move to speakers. We will come back if we have time after anyone who wants to speak has given their comments, and there's a couple more questions, so we can come back to those. I do want to, in case it was confusing in my response before, just be clear that we are taking this draft plan with the incorporated comments to City Council, hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, for them to adopt it as our strategy going forward. And then the different pieces of the plan will be implemented after that. So I will at this time, I think that we had one, we have yes. Okay. So I do have one person who wanted to speak. Before I call on them, I have a couple of people, I think, on the phone, not necessarily on Microsoft Teams. Did anyone who's on the phone and doesn't have access to the chat box want to put their name on the list to speak? If so, please just briefly unmute yourself now and give us your first and last name, and I will put you on the list. Okay. Then I have Philip Salerno who wanted to speak. So Philip, if you will take yourself off mute, just tell us your first and last name, and then you'll have 2 minutes to share with us your comments or questions.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Yes, this is Philip Salerno. I'm wearing multiple hats today, and that's part of the reason I had some of the questions earlier. So I'm representing my community, which is a homeowners association, which does not receive city trash services. I'm also the president of the Greater Inwood Super Neighborhood Council, and I'm also the vice chair of the Super Neighborhood Alliance. So for Emily's question, which is one of those questions, Sarah, that you hadn't had an opportunity to get to, yes, I will be reporting back to the chair and the secretary of the Super Neighborhood Alliance, and I will bring this up during our November monthly meeting of the Super Neighborhood Alliance so that all the other Super Neighborhood councils will be aware of both the survey as well as the plan, et cetera. So I hope that helps out with Emily's question. So my concern on this is, as I mentioned earlier in the question that you didn't get a chance to get to, in page V, meaning 5 of the executive summary, it says residents receiving city services would pay monthly fees of $21 to $26 for both the monthly service fee and the environmental fee. Later in the document, it talks about trash services. So I think the executive summary, when you talk about city services, that could be everything from HPD and HFD to water to whatever. So I think for accuracy, the report needs to indicate what it's talking about when it talks about city services. because city services is a more ubiquitous term and not related to specifically to trash. The question I had about the environmental fee, if it's being tied to water meters, in our case, our HOA pays for the water, and we have multiple water meters, including irrigation water meters. So my concern is that we're going to start getting hit with, 10, 15, 20 environmental fees each month for a single community of townhouses. And it's kind of, it seems like communities like mine are getting lumped in with apartment communities that use typically dumpsters, et cetera. So I think the task force, the committee, needs to go back and look at the fact that there are plenty of homeowner associations who do not currently receive city trash services, aren't eligible for refunds under the ordinance, and are now this environmental fee. We have all kinds of fees, but we just want it to be fair and equitable. The only other item I wanted to bring up with is because we have to maintain 1,600 linear feet, not square feet, but linear feet of city right of way for dumping. We're in the far north. The super neighborhood I represented is in the far northwest of the city. My borders actually are the city-county borders. We have a mix of trash service provided by the city of Houston and trash services contracted through private trash haulers, including paying for recycling. So it doesn't do a service to lump everybody in because they don't receive service from the city. They're multi-family just because you're in a townhouse. So there are different circumstances there. And then last, I'm concerned about, and because of that, I'm concerned about giving solid waste the ability to write tickets. Right now, IPS under the Department of Neighborhoods has that responsibility, and solid waste will not come out to the city right of way to pick up illegal dumping. We have to put up our own cameras and monitor this. So there needs to be a little bit more discussion on granting solid waste staff the ability to ticket and due process under code of ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Salerno. Thank you. I'm sorry for anyone. We don't have anyone else signed up to speak at the moment, so he did go over 2 minutes a little bit. So if you do want to request to speak, a reminder just to sign up in the chat box. And you covered a lot of great comments there. I will say just generally as a reminder that the items that are laid out in the plan as recommended actions would require, some further analysis on exactly how they would be implemented at the time of implementation. So it may not cover, we had a lot of it's very big scope that we were trying to address with this. So we may not have gotten to all of the details on how things would necessarily be implemented. But we did try to just outline the things that the city needs to consider taking into the future. I will make a note, thank you for the edit, and we'll go back and look at that section in the executive summary to make that clearer to what we're referencing, because I think that may be the section that some people are likely to read it is at the very beginning. So Mike, did you have anything that you wanted to share in response to Mr. Salerno's comments?
No, I appreciate your comments, and that's good feedback. I would say that from the environmental fee standpoint of things, what we're trying to accomplish there is to have services that are being provided citywide where, it's not just single family households that receive the benefit of that program, having full participation of, all residents as well as the commercial sector contribute to solving those problems, such as illegal dumping that's taking place throughout the city. So that's the thinking on the environmental fee.
And if I may, Mr. Salerno, this is Harry Hayes speaking. The environmental services are, as Mike indicated, they're for the group of services that every residential unit benefits from. That would be a robust litter abatement program. It's the homeless encampment services. It would be retrieval of and management of shopping carts, abandoned scrap tires, the fact that we don't have enough neighborhood depositories. We had a customer comment earlier about, the need to have the availability to get rid of more material. And so, as Mike had pointed out in the presentation, we are very short when it comes to our ability to do those things that you and the communities that you represent and others all over the city would like us to very aggressively deal with. We understand and appreciate, and Pink, that the independent group that Mike is leading has looked at our cafeteria of services, and they very easily recognize that based on what we try to do, it is inadequate because good folks like yourself and all over, they need more. And we need more than 30 or 80 inspectors going out once every month looking at these activities and issues. We need more than just a small partnership with Harris County with a few cameras, right? And so that's what the plan is dealing with. We are a green city by appearance as you look out on the skyline and on the ground, but we have a number of activities and items that you and others demand we do something about. And that is what this plan has incorporated while addressing what will happen, what needs to happen in the future so that the city you desire looks the way you would like it to look.
Mr. Director, I don't disagree at all with the need for the fee. I just want to make sure that it's equitable and how it's billed.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And anything that, as I said, with my multiple hats, having lived through having to just get along one stretch, 3-4 mile stretch of road on Deal Road with over a dozen illegal dumping sites on it, and having to work with the city council's office, member's office, and your all's office to get those cleaned up. It is quite a problem. I addressed that during the mayor's press conference that I was asked to speak at a couple of weeks ago. So I'm fully on board with it. It's just I want it to be equitable and obviously, get better enforcement on the illegal dumping. We actually caught some people right after we did a cleanup and gave it to Lieutenant Scales from Harris County Constable, and they brought them out on Tuesday and made them clean up their debris that they left on the side of the road.
Well, very good, and again, your approach and your support is much appreciated. And as I indicated, to have AZB come in with their group, look at all of these items, compare us to the rest of the state, and come back with this draft plan of where we need to be to meet your desires and wishes. That speaks volumes and adds a great voice to what we have been saying to City Council for a number of years. Go ahead, Sarah. You're on mute, Sarah.
That was bound to happen. I apologize. Thank you, Director Hayes. We did have a question related to this topic since we were talking about it that just popped in around if our drivers, you know, and I think they do this, but as they're out on their routes, they're driving past illegal dump sites, could they report those incidents rather than sending inspectors out? And
we're currently piloting technology that would allow us to be able to do that. And so I don't want to speak and endorse anybody to do that, but the short answer is yes, they've been doing that verbally or via the radio system. But excuse me, we're now piloting technology, which, if I'm not mistaken, is also a part of what's in the report, that we need to stay technologically current so that we can do the various services the way the customers would like them to be done efficiently.
Great, thank you. Okay, so at this time, I don't have anyone else in the queue to speak. So just a reminder that if you would like to speak, please type your first and last name and the phrase request to speak in the chat box, or submit your questions there. And until I see another name pop up to speak, questions that we did, we had a couple that we haven't had a chance to address yet. We talked about adjusting for the cost of living. Okay, so this is a comment and question, and I might ask Allison to help because part of this is around waste reduction and just generating less waste. So I will read the comment and the questions. It begins, I'm also concerned about the massive amounts of brush and construction waste put out by my neighbors every month, often blended despite the designated brush, like tree or junk waste collection month. Biweekly recycling and weekly trash are similarly blended. So what will the city do to encourage less trash generation and less contaminated recycling collection? I'm going to start there, and then there's a couple other, but we'll address that one first. And I will say that, you know, the department's working on some updated education pushes to help our residents know how to interact with their recycling card appropriately. So we are working on that. We do recognize our contamination rate it's really high, and we need to get that down. It's above the average for single stream programs right now, so we would like to have that be reduced. And I will take this moment before asking Allison to jump in on some of the recommendations we have for reduction in waste generation to say that if you do have city recycling, I encourage you to remember to recycle your empty, clean, and dry bottles, cans, paper, and cardboard. So plastic bottles, glass bottles, metal cans, and paper and cardboard in your cart. And so those are usually your consumer packaging items from kitchen, bath, and laundry type of products. So just have to put that out there as a quick educational piece. Allison, can I call on you to talk more about how we address in the plan for the that's actually one of the metrics that we looked at, would be a reduction in waste generation per capita.
Right, and I was going to jump right to the recommendations that we've included in the plan at this point, and some of it sort of relates to talking about with education and outreach, and including in those outreach materials, encouraging wise consumption, so just consume less in the first place, but also collaborating potentially with the private sector to do more on the reuse side. I mean, the city already does quite a bit with the reuse warehouse and some other ways to facilitate the reuse of materials, but we've got some recommendations in there on the reuse side. And then another recommendation that's included specific to source reduction is looking at pay as you throw for garbage collection. So it's more of an incentive. Now that can only happen if other certain things happen, but that is also talked about in the plan, kind of related to source reduction. I also just want to make a note that some of the recommendations include the city leading by example. So it's the city generating less waste itself in all of the city offices. So do that through the procurement process, and then also with the solid waste department, just making recommendations to those other offices for how they can generate less waste in the first place. So we've incorporated elements for the city to lead by example, as well as specific elements to reach out to residents and businesses as well.
Can I add one quick comment on that in terms of reducing waste generation? On the organic side, we do have recommendations to do a couple of things, and that is to re-emphasize the Don't Bag It program for grass trimmings. The city already has that program, but to encourage that more, and also to beef up the master composter program that would allow people who want to and are able to compost their yard waste or food waste in backyard bins.
Great. Thank you, Risa. Yeah, that's a good thing to include. And certainly our messaging, we've talked internally about pushing more of that messaging in line with those recommendations about how can you just generate less waste to begin with, rather than being concerned what to do with something after you consume it. Maybe, if you buy in bulk, or use things that are reusable or repaired rather than single-use items. And so that is something that we recognize is really the first, first step in generating less waste.
And Sarah, I'd just like to add, compared to the last plan that was done for the city, which just focused on the residential side, this plan does envision a lot more partnership with the private sector, because that's where most of the waste is generated, and they've got the best opportunities to reduce large quantities. So we do see some partnerships both on the multifamily side of things, as well as businesses and institutions, to get that waste stream down.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point as well. Okay, this is in the same comment. It's related, but speaking to the organics piece, which Risa did touch on a little bit. For monthly trash and brush pickups, I think that we're talking about what we call junk and tree waste pickup. I've noticed that the waste is sometimes trucked in by residents from other locations, like a project site, or generated by private contractors, like a tree trimmer, and left at the residents for the city to pick up. How will the city encourage less junk generation, better brush collection, and also make sure our streets aren't used as temporary disposal sites until the trucks come by? Before I get into the question on reducing the generation, I will just mention that currently, per the City Code of Ordinances in Chapter 39, which regulates the solid waste department and our activities, the material that's left at the curb for us to collect is supposed to be generated by the homeowner, not by a contractor, and that includes a lawn service or a tree trimmer, as well as someone who may be doing a larger project on a home. So that is in the code. I understand it may be difficult to enforce, but that is already something that would be against the city code to have that happen. And so the further question about encouraging less junk generation and better brush collection, I think we touched on that a little bit. I'll ask Risa, Allison, did you all have anything you wanted to add around waste reduction, specifically for tree waste or junk waste?
Well, I can say specific to the part of the comment or question about brush from commercial generators being deposited, in front of residences to be collected by the city. There are a lot of that issue to deal with. One of them is possibly to provide more drop-off facilities and or making them open longer hours to make it a little bit easier for those businesses to handle that material properly. That's one option. There's an enforcement piece to this too, and this particular situation is particularly hard to enforce because you almost have to be there when it happens to know who did it. But one way to try to deal with that is with additional cameras, which, if that situation is occurring, in a particular area, then that would be a good justification for additional cameras in that area, specifically to figure out who's doing it and prevent it from happening in the future. It's difficult to get your arms around, though. Well, yeah, I guess that's really what I needed to say about that. I wanted to talk about the commercial brush at residential locations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the point about the additional drop-off sites to give people more opportunity to handle it properly was a good one as well. And I'd mentioned previously about, kind of promoting wise consumption and things that can last longer and not generate waste in the first place, and even refurbishing, as Sarah and I both had mentioned previously, when it comes to trying to reduce the junk generation.
Yeah, thank you. And we do have our reuse warehouse where we can take building materials that are gently used and we make those available to nonprofit organizations at no cost. That's a current program of the department. And certainly we have one of those locations, but that's the type of thing that we would, if we had the proper resources, we could look at expanding locations for the drop off of materials that could be reused as well. So let's see, the next question is from Emily. She says, I'm the executive director for the Houston Heights Association and is disappointed to hear that we've only had approximately 350 residents take the survey. She's added it to their social media platforms in hopes that her neighbors will take time to provide their feedback. Have you considered messaging the super neighborhood councils to ask them to send out the survey? And yes, we would love to do that. And I think maybe if we can get a contact information, we would like to send that out. I know when Mr. Salerno was speaking, he mentioned sending it out in November. We currently do have the survey set to close on October 31st. So if we could get the notice out before then, we'd be happy to send an email out. We'd love to do that. We have an email we can also forward you to share. So if you want to send us an email at this longrange@houstontx.gov and we can coordinate getting that sent out. Definitely would like to get it out to as many people as possible. We want to hear from as many residents as possible.
Sarah, I'll send an email to you through that website to that email address, and that way we can send it out to all the councils, and we'll get it on the Alliance Facebook page as well. So if you have something, a typical blur, some kind of pre-page that then we're happy to include that, and that works out great to be able to send out. So I'll do that while we're discussing, and give you my email address so you can go ahead and send that to us, and I'll get it disseminated out. The November was the monthly meeting that I was talking about.
Yeah, that is wonderful. Thank you very much. And yes, we do have a kind of a pre-drafted email with a visual and everything that we can send to you to disseminate. And also, I think a post that we've put on our Facebook as well. If you don't follow us on Facebook or on Twitter, you can do that there. We've been posting these updates too, if that's an easy way for you to reshare or retweet the information. Okay. And then, okay, so the next question I have here, we covered the question on illegal dumping. And then the next question I have is, will instituting a waste fee prevent the suspension of recycling services in post-hurricane cleanups? And I will, I guess that probably depends on the extent of the disaster and the type of debris that's generated. We are a really well battle tested department when it comes to disaster debris cleanup. We've had our fair share of storms the past few years, especially, and each one is different. So it depends on whether it's a wind event or a rain event. I think certainly, and I'm going to let Mike also expand on this, but certainly I think if the department was right-sized for our operations, then we may be able to continue more of our services if the disaster allowed for it. But there could still be an instance where, depending on the level and the nature of the debris, our first concern, we really act as a first responder in that type of situation, and our first concern is getting out and getting that debris up, because oftentimes we clear the way for other service providers to come back in and work on reconnecting the power or provide other services that need to happen. So I think that's a bit of a maybe. Certainly we would be better positioned if we had a fully right-sized department to be able to continue all of our services, but with the caveat that depending on the nature and the extent of a given disaster, our first priority in that regard is to continue picking up regular household garbage and to get out and start clearing the debris as soon as possible. So Mike, or I don't know if Director Hayes, if you guys have something you want to add to that.
I think you covered it real well in the fact that it is dependent on the degree of that event and how much damage it's done in a residential area in terms of how it impacts your ability to collect the recyclables. I know that the public safety aspect is first and foremost, and making it so that other first responders have access to those areas. Those are the critical things that need to be taken care of. If you had a fee and were properly funded, you'd be able to react to that much quicker and be able to get back into normal service in a much more timely fashion.
Yeah. Okay. This has been a very great discussion today, and I appreciate everybody's comments and questions. Reminder, if you have any further questions, to put them in the chat box, or if you would like to speak, we still can take speakers if you would like to put that in the chat box. So, do so at this time. I'll ask our project team, from the discussion we've had and the questions you've heard, are there other things that you think you'd like to share with the plan, call out, draw people's attention to that we've not covered, or expound upon anything that we have covered?
I think we talk a little bit about the environmental fee, and that is something that, as we design that, we'll have to look at specific instances of how that's collected and make sure that that's equitable across the board, but also that it generates the fees that are going to be necessary for all those services that need to be funded at a much better level, such as cleanup of illegal dump sites and so forth. But there are a number of things that we've laid out as recommendation that will eventually need to be given a little bit more thought in terms of the actual implementation of those action items.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask, I see Frank Blake typed his name into the chat box. Did you want to speak? Was that a request to speak? Okay, sorry. It looks like he has a question instead, so I see that now. Does the draft plan include graduated trash cart sizes for reducing waste? Great question, and we will talk about that. And I think that's commonly called like a pay-as-you-throw system, where if you have different trash cart sizes, and so it usually starts with like a 45 or 48 gallon cart, and then like a 65 gallon cart, and then a 96 gallon cart. Those are sort of typical sizes that are available, and then there will be a different service fee amount depending on the size of your cart. And so that does allow people to choose what they need based on their habits. So I think that is a recommendation that we have when it comes to looking at the service fee as an option, that is something that other cities have implemented. Mike, did you want to talk about that?
Right. It is a recommendation in the plan to look at that as an option for reducing waste. But in order to be able to implement a program like that, you need to have a fee structure that allows for it. So it'd be very difficult to implement under the current system where it just comes out of the general fund. But if you went to a monthly service fee, you could adopt a program where that fee varies depending on the size of the cart. Allison, did you want to add anything more to that?
I think you just touched on it, and I know I'd mentioned that earlier, that it is one of the recommendations, but it does hinge upon other things happening first, is kind of how I put it earlier. So I think that's what you were just explaining too, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah. And it does also help with some of the looking at affordable rates, because if you have if you only need a small garbage cart, then it would be less expensive as well. And usually those systems are designed to where then your recycling cart, or for programs if they have a curbside organics cart, then that's included either at no fee or it's a larger container to help the I think the theory behind it is to incentivize people to recycle more and throw less into the garbage cart. But I do think programs that are successful with that also have an enforcement piece and an education piece where they are able to monitor and ensure that that doesn't just end up with people using their large recycling cart as a trash cart. So, okay, we have a couple more questions that have come in. One question around, won't graduated fees just cause more poaching by neighbors? I'm not certain. Mark Williamson, that's your question. I don't know if I am totally clear on what you mean by poaching. Mike or Allison, do you guys have an idea on that?
I think it would mean putting your trash in your neighbor's container so that you can have a smaller cart. And I think the other thing I was going to add, and the next one down about illegal dumping, and then Sarah, your point about it potentially putting more into the recycling container. Some of the other recommendations in the plan do have to deal with enforcement, especially on the recycling cart. So as far as moving the trash into the recycling cart to have a smaller trash cart, that the pay as you throw or the variable rate carts really should go hand in hand with better enforcement. And again, there are more recommended strategies related to enforcement that frankly would go whether there was the variable pay or the pay as you throw or not, just to be keeping a closer eye on especially the contamination of recycling carts. And the idea of poaching your neighbor's cart potentially as well.
Right. Thank you, Allison. I think you did pick up on that. He did clarify, Mark clarified in the chat that says by poaching, I mean dumping into other containers. So yes, using your neighbor's container instead of your own. And so I think that you covered that. One other question here, will initiating a trash fee it's around will make illegal dumping like in less affluent neighborhoods worse than it is now? I'm not. I think I guess the
Sarah, this is Harry. I don't yes. think so. And again, I'll go back to Mr. Salerno's comments earlier about the city being more timely and responsive. And so having the fee means now that you've got enough folks on the ground, and you also have costed out and staffed the appropriate roving illegal dumping crews. And so, whether or not there would be, even if it were the same level of illegal dumping at the beginning, I think that would be your high point. As you would have the necessary personnel, enforcement activities, to begin extincting those behaviors. Primarily because most of the illegal dumping that we see is from folks who generally live within a few blocks of the area where the illegal dumping is occurring. As the other speaker stated earlier, contractors hauling material into their home, and you answered that, that is illegal. And I would anticipate that, given how effectively we use cameras and social media, that is a good candidate for a rat on a rat project with our Crime Stoppers group, because you maintain your anonymity. And so taking a photograph of somebody hauling something in, dumping it in the neighborhood is illegal. It's illegal today, it'll be illegal tomorrow. And so right now, I would say to everybody on the call, if you want to be the Mr. or Mrs., well, be Mrs. Kravitz, not Mr. Kravitz, because he didn't care, but be Mr. Kravitz and catch him and report them anonymously to Crime Stoppers, and let us conduct that investigation with our partners at HPD in Harris County to extinct those behaviors.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that feedback there. We are getting close to the end of our time for today. We have about 10 minutes left. So if you do want to speak or if you have a question, please let us know. Tomorrow evening, we are having another public meeting from 5 to 7. That's a student invitation. We're hoping to have a conversation with our leaders of tomorrow. We've targeted high school and college students. So if you know someone in that group who has an interest in public policy, planning, the environment, sustainability, zero waste, this would be a really interesting meeting for them to join into. I know that we have reached out to a few universities and groups. So, if you've got other people that you know of, please let them know. And again, a reminder to go to our website and take our survey. Please tell your friends and neighbors to take our survey if they haven't already. It is limited to Houston residents, but that's a lot of people. So please let them know. And I will just and mention again, we have a few of our task force members that are on the call. We appreciate all their time and experience and information they've shared with us. I didn't know if any one of you wanted to share any thoughts on the project or the plan. I'd be happy to call on you now if you wanted to share something. Or again, if anyone else from the project team has any last thoughts that you want to share, or things to point out as we're winding down for today. Okay.
So, Sarah, if I may,
absolutely.
I know you're going to thank everybody, but I want to get a quick thank you in for all of those folks that took their time and interest to be concerned about Houston, as they always have been. And I certainly want to thank the project team. I want to say to the public, these folks have worked unbelievably hard, digging out information, making certain that Houston would have the best plan to put forward that made sense, that was obtainable first and foremost, and then that it was something that Houstonians would and could afford as we look at the range of services that we have grown accustomed to and would like to see continue. Some of those need augmenting and enhancing, and Mike and company have been very above board with that, and certainly Risa Fisher with the, I'm sorry, Risa, I'm just stuck in the past. Risa Weinberger. I'm going to get there. Risa Weinberger. You know, when you meet somebody, you always meet them the first time forever. Risa Weinberger. She's going to kill me when she sees me, y'all. I'm going to get up and run like that, Mr. Salerno.
No,
That's what
Harry,
I'm going
you're a
to do.
lot bigger than I am. I don't think I'm going to kill you.
But, you know, the organics is a huge part of what we do. And certainly as we think about how Houstonians live, because we're still the #1 eating out city in America. We love our restaurants, and that's a lot of organics that we have to deal with. And the approach that she has undertaken for us and what we need to look for in the future has been very practical. And so I would encourage you all to look at that. And then certainly, Sarah, you, Abel, Tyra, the internal solid waste team, always committed and dedicated, along with the employees and executives of the department. So y'all have been well served in putting together this plan, and we have certainly got a lot out of our team to get us where we are today. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that and appreciate you being here. We had a comment that from Becky Edmondson that was nice to hear from you. So thanks for being on the call. I know that people appreciate hearing your words as well. We are almost out of time. We did have one last question around the consideration of coexistence for our carts, solid waste cans, and cars in heavily parked areas. Curb blockage can be a problem on both sides of the divide. And I would say that yes, we do know that issue ourselves. And I think that's one of those topics that, along with looking at how our carts and services coexist with bike lanes and sidewalks and also curbs, Houston's development pattern has been changing really quickly. Over the past few years, we're getting a lot denser, especially inside the loop, and that is causing a shortage of street frontage for carts, where if you had one house and 2 carts, maybe now you've got a few different units on the same property and they need to be putting out 8 carts or something. So we are aware of that, and that is something that our GIS staff and the planning department, are looking at, and certainly we'll make a note to include that in with the other comments we received earlier on the bike lanes and sidewalks. So yes, thank you for that. Did I cover that, or did I miss anything from Mike? Or
no, it is. We talked about it earlier in terms of the growth in the multifamily sector that you're responsible for, being one of your bigger challenges on the collection side of things. So yeah, that's something that definitely needs to be looked at in the near term. And Harry, thank you for your comments. And I want to echo your remarks about, how hard Sarah and her team have worked throughout this process. I've really enjoyed working with them. They do put in more time than people realize.
That is great. And yes, we are coming to a close, and I appreciate all of the positive comments I'm seeing. Thank you so much for your time and feedback. And I know that Director Hayes mentioned them, but I do want to acknowledge Abel Fernandez, who's our creative services person. He was your friendly PowerPoint driver today, and Tyra Wilkins, our public information officer with the department. She's been helping out with monitoring the chat log, making sure that I get all the questions and comments from you all and they get acknowledged. So I appreciate their time and help so much. And yeah, we have a great team. We are coming right at the end of our time. So again, a reminder, this meeting has been recorded. We will be posting it up on our website for the project, the long range plan website. You can also find the slides from today and all the project documents. Take the survey by October 31st, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.